Nice. I like that. I can help you with your shots too. If you're getting ready to go out in the field and get some wildlife shots, I've got a few tips here that'll help you make your time in the wilderness more successful. We can practice at home. We don't have to live in the woods or actually have to wait till we go to the woods to do practice for wildlife. If we have a dog or a cat, even a little kid, if we have access to a little league football game, a baseball game, or something like that, catching action is what you want to learn to do. Freezing action. So if you can do any of that, if you have a bird feeder in your backyard, that's really good too, to help you find your bird in flight, looking through the zoom lenses. That's a real hassle when you put that zoom on trying to find your target, because your area is so condensed. But want to jump into these, and at the very end, if you're one that has wildlife shots or you're wanting to take wildlife shots to sell, I have some advice for you that will help you sell 10 times more wildlife photos than you're selling now. It kind of goes against all our instincts and everything we believe when we're out in the field shooting wildlife, so stay tuned for the last tip. The first thing we want to do, we want to know our subject. You know what? Man, I came down here, I forgot my hot chocolate. God, that would be nice. Yeah, I like that. Salted caramel. I'm really getting good. Oh, yeah. Back to the tips. Know your subject. If you're going out to shoot white-tailed deer, what do they like to eat? Where's their territory? What times are they active? These things will help you be more successful. Is there a time of year? Like right now, we're early November. My whitetail here in my backyard, they're in the rut. They're looking for females and getting ready to breed. And this is a really good time of year to shoot. Pretty soon the leaves will be gone. They'll be easier to spot. Now there's two ways that you can shoot and shoot wildlife that I recommend. I never shoot in shutter priority. And I'm not saying you can't get good shots shooting shutter priority. But what happens when you shoot in shutter priority is you pick the shutter speed and your camera picks the aperture. Okay? To me, picking the aperture is the most important part because you're taking control of your scene. You're determining how much of your shot is in focus. You don't want the whole shot in focus. You want your animal's eyes to be sharp, but you don't want that background to be sharp. So I never shoot in shutter priority, and I've had people get mad at me for trying to tell them there's a better way, and some people I can convince that there's a better way, and some people are just dead set in their ways, and that's okay. Like I said, you can get a good shot in any mode in your camera, but I think my way will increase your odds, okay? When we're shooting an aperture priority, what is happening is we're picking the aperture. So we're determining the depth of field in our photo. We're determining how much is in focus, okay? Shooting wildlife, the eyes have to be sharp. That's the only thing that has to be sharp. The tip of that wing doesn't have to be sharp. The eye has to be sharp. Aperture priority, your camera is constantly picking a shutter speed based on your aperture, which is the size of the opening that you're shooting through, and based on your ISO. And your ISO is what determines how sensitive your sensor is to the light. The higher our ISO is, the more grain we're going to add to our photo. So keeping it as low as we can is best, okay? Now, it correlates to our shutter speed. So when we're shooting birds in flight, say a duck or something like that, if you want 1/3000th of a second and you're in low light, you're going to be shooting some high ISOs, and that's okay. You're going to have a grainy photo. As long as you have your ISO where it needs to be, your picture will be sharp because it's going to provide you the shutter speed you need based on your aperture, okay, and your ISO. Now, I shot that way for many, many years, and I still can, and I can still get a really good shot. Shooting an aperture priority and then using exposure compensation is what I recommend for a beginner. And exposure compensation, man, I wish I had my camera now. With shooting with exposure compensation, and that is a button on your camera that looks like this right here, the little plus and minus flag, and everybody's got one. And what that does, it opens up a little meter. It goes -1, +1. You know, it can go -1, -2, -3, -4, +1, +2, +3. The more positive you go, the more light you're going to add. The more negative you go, the more light you're going to subtract. Okay, and what that does is it helps dial in your white point. Okay, so you're not overexposing or underexposing. And you do this through your histogram, and I've got another video on histogram, you know, how to read a histogram. Very simple, don't overthink that, but very important to know how to read your histogram. Now, what I do is I shoot in manual. And in manual, I'm picking everything. I'm picking my aperture, and I'm picking my shutter speed, okay? And what I'm doing, like right here in my blind right now, I'm hoping for a whitetail to come up. In probably 1/500th, 1/1000th of a second, I'm going to be doing okay with that whitetail. But my camera right now is set at 1/3000th of a second in manual mode at an aperture of 5.6, and my ISO is set to auto. So I've picked my shutter speed at 5.6, my aperture at 5.6. I've picked my shutter speed at 1/3000th of a second. So what's going to happen now is my ISO is going to raise or lower however high it needs to be to dial in those settings, the 0.003 of a second. It'll go as high as it needs to, okay? And that's, now I probably ain't going to have a duck fly in here, but just in case I do, I'm ready for that. Now, if I want to, and I have a 3D focus tracking set or some kind of focus tracking, you know, that'll be in your autofocus in your cameras. Not all cameras, some of the entry-level cameras won't have a focus tracking. They'll have single point and different things like that. And single point will work sometimes, but if you have a tracking mode in your camera, it's kind of like cheating. It makes getting the moving objects a little bit easier. So yeah, so aperture priority, you're picking your aperture, which is most important. You're dialing in your scene, how much you want to be sharp. Your camera is picking the shutter speed based on the amount of light reflecting off your subject and the ISO that you have set, okay? So if you're shooting and you need 1/500th of a second and you've only got 1/250th of a second, when you look through there, you got numbers in the bottom of your viewfinder. When you look through there, that bottom number on the left is your shutter speed. And always be aware of what it is. So you need 1/500th of a second, but you only got 1/250th. Well, if you go from ISO 100 to ISO 200, you've doubled your ISO, you've doubled your shutter speed. Now you're shooting at 1/500th of a second. Okay? And if you're sitting there in the evening and it's getting darker, pretty soon it's going to go back down to 2/50th of a second, and you'll have to raise it to 400, and you'll have to keep raising it as you need to. Don't raise it any higher than you have to, and don't raise it before you need to, because then you're just going to get more grain in your image. Okay? Then in manual, I'm picking everything except my ISO. I'm picking my shutter speed, I'm picking my aperture, but my ISO is variable. My ISO is variable, okay? And then when you're going out and you're planning these trips, say like you got a blind like me, set your blind up where the light is going to benefit you, okay? Try not to be shooting backlit or shadowed animals, you know, unless that's what you want. I mean, a silhouetted shot, I'm not saying is a bad shot. Take what you can get. But I'm looking for catch lights in the eyes and stuff, and I'm kind of set up where in the evening, if I shoot out this window and I have a whitetail up here, I'm not only going to get that whitetail, but I'm going to get the reflection in the water from it too. And I'm going to have, in the evening, I'm going to have the sun hitting the face of this animal, which is really going to light the reflection good. Okay, if I shoot out this window here in the morning, I'm going to have a good reflection the same way. So I've kind of set my blind up. Anybody can shoot that Britannica Encyclopedia shot, you know, that close-up of that animal. But to put something with it, you know, a foreground element, a reflection, you know, a pond, put the animal in a scene, tell a story with your shot. Where does it live? You know, what's it eating? Does it have the babies around, you know? Those are very impactful, very, very impactful. Okay, so now the next three I'm going to tell you about, we'll just kind of go over them real fast. You want to have your max frame rate set, okay? Continuous shooting mode, continuous focus. You want to use back button focus, and I have a separate video on back button focus, so I'm not going to get too much into that. And you want to pre-focus in your target area. So if I'm sitting there, I forgot my camera again. If I'm sitting there in my blind and I'm wanting to shoot something, a bird that flying by or something, I'm going to focus on something, you know, if I want that bird in that 30 to 40 yard area, I'm going to focus on something like this tree right here. It's 30 yards out, okay? Now my focus is set at 30 yards. So when that bird flies by here, when it gets in that 30 yard zone, I'm going to start hitting my back button focus and I'm going to light him up, okay? I'm going to get focus grabbed onto this bird and shoot him as he goes by. Now, if you're sightseeing with your camera and you're looking at this mountaintop that's a mile away, you know, with your zoom lens, and that's cool, you can see a lot of stuff like that. But then that duck flies in and your focus is locked on something a mile away, and now you want to shoot, you're not even going to see that duck in here, okay? It's going to see through it, and it's going to be looking around, what the hell are you looking at? You know, it's not going to be able to find it. So pre-focus on something in your target area while you're sitting there and ready for that bird to fly in or whatever. You won't get a shot if you don't do that, okay? Very important, very important. Okay. Now, when you do see that bird coming in, what I see a lot of people do, and this is a big mistake, is they got their camera down here. So they get their camera, they know that bird is up here somewhere right up in here. Now the bird's gone, okay? They missed that bird. What you do, you keep your eye on the bird. Keep your eye on the bird. Bring your camera to your eye, and you are going to be really close, and practice that all you can. Practice with your sparrows, your crows, your ravens, whatever. The bird doesn't have to be desirable to be practicing with it, okay? Practice every time you get a chance, because if you don't, you're practicing when that eagle flies by and you are going to cry. It takes a lot of practice to catch a bird in flight. It takes a lot of practice to locate a bird with your zoom. So you have to practice this before you ever get to do this, okay? It doesn't matter how much money you spend on your camera. I repeat this all the time. It doesn't matter how good a lens you have. It doesn't matter how many frames your camera can capture and how good your autofocus system is. If you can't find that bird, you can't do this, okay? You have got to practice finding that bird in that zoom lens. Your area is so condensed and it's hard to do. Very hard to do. Practice, practice, practice. Okay. Now, we got the back button focus. We got our max frame rate set. Continuous focus. We got to focus on the eyes. Eyes have to be sharp. The eyes have to be sharp. That's the only thing that has to be sharp in your photo. You want the viewer's eyes to go to the eyes of your animal, your target animal, okay? And the way we do that, when you look through your viewfinder, you have that little red dot or you have that black square. You put that black square or that red dot over that animal's eyes. That's where the focus is going to be grabbed. And if you're using a wide open aperture for wildlife, those eyes are going to be sharp, but you're going to see the rest of that photo go in blur, and that's what we want. We don't want somebody sitting there, is that a picture of the moose or that fireweed or that spruce tree in the background? What the hell is this, you know? We want the eye to go right to the animal, and aperture is the way we do that. Eyes must be sharp. I do a lot of hiking, and I take people out in Alaska and we do photo walks and hikes and stuff through the mountains. And a lot of times we just hike out to cool places to shoot. And whenever I'm hiking, I've got my zoom lens on and I have it set up for a bird. I have it set up for a bird in flight. An eagle, I want about 1/2000th of a second, 1/1000th of a second. A duck, 1/3000th of a second. But I use it, like I've mentioned before, I use that 3D tracking or a tracking autofocus. And I have that set because that's what I use for birds. Now, when I'm shooting moose or whitetail, I'm using a single point, not so much of a tracking system, just a single point autofocus. And I'm putting that single point over the eyes. Now, when that bird flies by and I'm hiking, since I have my camera set up for that bird, I can shoot that bird as it's flying by, okay? But if I'm not set up for that bird, that eagle's flying by, I got to do this. Now I'm set up for that bird. And where do you think that bird is? Yeah, that's right. That bird's gone. Okay? Yeah, be set up for a bird when you're hiking. It's just one of those things. I miss so many shots. When I miss a shot, I always ask myself, what the hell can I do so that never happens again? And that's what I've come up with. I am always set up for a bird because that moose comes in or that whitetail comes over here to get a drink of water or eat some of this corn or whatever. I can make that switch. And I can shoot that whitetail as long as it stands out there in front of me because it's not going to fly by in 2 seconds. Now you've planned ahead. We've already talked about planning ahead, where we put our blind up and stuff and how the light is going to benefit you. So if you've got your blind set up in a good spot, what you're going to want when you're shooting is catch lights. Look for the flicker in their eyes, catch lights. Very impactful. And anytime you see the catch lights in your subject, you should have that shutter button pressed down and don't let up. Okay, those are very impactful shots. Very, very, get lots of them. But when you're shooting an aperture priority, you always want to be aware of your changing light. Okay, wildlife photography, we're going to be out a lot of times at sunrise. Okay, we're going to be out a lot of times at sunset. Those are the busiest time when the wildlife are moving. Okay, this is something that I don't do very often because I'm always walking. I'm sitting in a blind, and I'm shooting birds that are coming by. But if you have a tripod and you can use it, do. If you can, do. All the time, okay? That's a steadier shot, but for me, they just kind of get in the way, And I shoot with a carbon fiber tripod. A carbon fiber tripod is not only lighter, which I like, but, I work in Alaska. And even in the summertime, it's cold. A lot of times I'm wearing gloves. And if I'm using an aluminum or a steel tripod, even wearing gloves, that tripod's going to make your hands cold. Carbon fiber does not absorb the cold. So that's the thing that I like about it more than anything. Hell, I'm strong enough. I can carry an aluminum or a steel tripod if I need to, but I'm not tough enough to have cold hands. Yeah, carbon fiber tripod's the way to go. And if you can use your tripod, do use it, okay? Know your subject, know your shutter speeds. Set up where you can see where the light is going to benefit you. Back button focus, max frame rate. Shoot an aperture priority or manual with auto ISO. And watch for catch lights. Keep your gratitude higher than your expectations. You're going to have some good days out there. You're going to learn every time you put that camera around your neck, you're going to learn something. Okay, I learned the tip about always being set up for a bird. Nobody had to teach me that. You're going to learn through the school of hard knocks. And every time you come home and put a photo on the computer, you're going to learn something because you like something about that photo, or you're going to learn something because you don't like something about that photo. But every trip is going to be a learning experience, and keep your eyes open, keep your mind open, and be attentive, and then be careful. Know your wildlife, know how dangerous they are, know your safety rules, know your safety distances and stuff like that, how far you need to be away from them. Don't do what I do. what I say. And have a good day. And then my very last tip that I wanted to tell you, the one that I told you, if you're really wanting to be a wildlife photographer, make a living doing it, selling your work. I told you when we buy those big lenses, we're wanting to zoom in all the time, and like we're shooting for Britannica Encyclopedia. Environmental animal shots outsell close-up candids 10-1. And what I mean by that is simply zooming out and showing the environment that the animal lives in is what people want to pay for. Okay, we get that camera, we've got that big zoom lens, man, that animal's right there in front of us, and that's what we want to do. We want it right here. So we got a real good picture of that animal's face. When we get home and we look on that computer, oh man, I missed the reflection. I see a little bit of reflection. If I would have zoomed out, I would have got the reflection of this animal. If I would have zoomed out, there's the den that fox lives in. You are a storyteller. I can't beat that into you any harder. Don't zoom in just because you have 500 millimeters. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad shot. Just consider your other options. Environmental wildlife shots outsell close-up candids 10-1. That was my tip. That goes against all of our instincts. It's something we don't normally think. And I hope at least one of these tips improves your wildlife outings. And I hope you enjoyed it. I love doing them. Thanks for stopping here, and thanks for hanging out with me this long.